Let's start with New Zealand. Professor Michael Baker, when we look at, every single death in this pandemic is a tragedy, but comparing the deaths is very illuminating. Here in the UK, we have 236 deaths per million of our population, 236 per million. Where you are in New Zealand, obviously smaller population and a smaller country, but only 7 deaths per million of your population. What did New Zealand do to get a hold of this so effectively?
Yes, good morning. Well, New Zealand's taken an elimination approach. So basically, we want to stop the virus at the border, stamp it out within the country and eliminate it. And we're on track to do that.
And New Zealand obviously has the benefit of being an island, but you did shut down the border pretty quickly. We still have an open border in the UK, for example. How much of an impact do you think not allowing people to fly in, particularly from countries that have bad issues with coronavirus, has been in your ability to contain this?
Well, it's critical. I mean, you have to manage people arriving in the country who may be infected. Technically, we haven't shut the border down. I mean, it's still open to citizens who are returning, but they have to go into 2 weeks of mandatory quarantine. And in many ways, we're following the same model that Taiwan has run very successfully, and I think they should be really praised for what they've done. They recognised the pandemic very early. In January, they started managing their borders, and they have fewer cases than New Zealand as a result.
When you look at the issues we've had in the UK, are you critical of the way that our government has gone about this, as many people here are?
Well, I think actually the entire Western world has underestimated this virus, and it's been a major policy failing. And really, we should have looked to Asia, I think, earlier, because they contained the pandemic very effectively in China, and we could have applied the same model. I think there was a window of opportunity to do that, because what the Western world has done is treated this like an influenza pandemic, where you can mitigate, but you can't actually contain it. Whereas we should have recognised this earlier as more like a SARS virus, where containment is possible. You can interrupt transmission. And if the Western world had done that, there was an opportunity. I think we could have contained this very effectively and taken an elimination approach to it, as New Zealand is doing, as mainland China is doing, as a number of countries in Asia are doing.
Okay.
That is a much better example.
Well, let's talk to Professor Johan Giesecke from Sweden, because you have taken a very different approach. I mean, some would say a radical approach over in Sweden. And comparing our 236 deaths per million of the population, you have 152 per million, but you have not locked down in Sweden, have you? If we see pictures of Sweden, we will still see plenty of people milling about, cafes, restaurants, markets still open. Crowds can't be bigger than 50 people, and I know that you advise social distancing, but you're very critical of the UK government for a very different reason. What is that?
The UK started in the right direction, but then a famous paper from Imperial College came out and Boris Johnson made a U-turn. And now I think you're on the wrong track.
You think we're on the wrong track because we went to lockdown?
Yes.
Sweden has had, it's an interesting case, Sweden, because you haven't really had any form of lockdown. It's hard to assess yet whether that has been successful or not. But how are your figures comparing, for example, in infections and deaths to your immediate Scandinavian neighbours?
They're higher. But one very important thing, I think we should wait a year in comparing deaths in different countries, because the cases that have died in Sweden will be the ones similar to the ones who, when you open your lockdown, you'll have more deaths. And in the end, I think they will be about the same in each country.
So you think the problem with the lockdown is that eventually you have to unlock it?
Yeah, you postpone what's happening. If you did it for a very long time, so there was vaccine available, then you could probably keep the lockdown. But in a democratic Western country, you can't shut people up for 18 months. That's impossible. You can do it in China, but you can't do it in England.
Do you think that you will have, there will be a different economic effect in Sweden as a result of not locking down?
we shouldn't exaggerate this thing with the legal lockdown and the soft lockdown. The result in practice is very similar, actually. Yes, I think that the Swedish economy will come out it will be weakened, but not as weakened as in many other countries.
What I've been told, and you can clarify this, but I've been told that many Swedish people have actually taken it upon themselves to stay at home a lot more, almost having a kind of unofficial, self-inflicted lockdown. Is that true?
That's true. The headline of the Swedish policy is "People are not stupid." If you tell them what's good for them and what's good for the rest of the population, they follow your advice because they understand it. You don't need laws. You don't need police in the streets.
So in a sense, it's quite interesting that there's been much more trust given to the people. What's interesting here is, it's understood that the British government delayed any lockdown because they were worried British people wouldn't follow it. As it's turned out, actually, the British people have been extremely obedient. 90% in all the polls say they're happy to do this if it's for public health reasons. In Sweden, it hasn't been an order. It's just been, if you're sensible, we'll get through this.
Yeah, people are not stupid. One thing of the Swedish policy, which is that we'll reach herd immunity in Stockholm County, about a month from now or less. Mid-May, we'll have herd immunity.
What if you... can I ask you one thing? Do you accept you could be completely wrong? Do you accept that actually there could be a lot of people in Sweden who are getting infected by not having a more draconian lockdown, and that you might suddenly be in a very bad position? Is that a possibility, that you might just be wrong?
Everything is a possibility, but it's highly unlikely.